Right, so welcome to Mary and Simon from Northern Powergrid, who are going to talk a little bit about the DFES work that we conducted with them last year. So I'm just going to start by asking you, Mary, so remind us what happened during the last year.
Okay, well, it was this time a year ago. We had developed what are called distribution future energy scenarios. We call it DFES for short, which are different pathways to meet a low carbon future. And we teamed up with Planet Data a year ago in September and asked if you could, ODI Leeds, could put all our data onto a visual map so that people in different local authorities and different industries could zoom into their areas and see our projections for electric vehicles and heat pumps. It was a very exciting project. It was the first time that open data had really been used to begin a conversation about energy and what the future of energy should look like. So some people will have seen this already, but shall I very quickly just share my screen to give people a recap of what we developed and what ODI Leeds developed for us? Right, we developed these scenarios. This is clearly a map of the northeast in Yorkshire, which is the region that Northern Powergrid distributes electricity to. And we had a number of scenarios. We take scenarios that National Grid develop and we model them and interpret them across our region. And you could look at different pathways to a low carbon future, community renewables being a mainly electric heat pump, electric heat and transport pathway with electric vehicles and heat pumps. 2 degrees was a more hydrogen economy based pathway. So you could choose your scenario and you could zoom into a region. And I always choose Wakefield just because that's where I live. And you can see how many electric vehicles we think we've got today in 2020. And then I could zoom forward, say to 2030, and you could click on Wakefield again, see how many, 61,000. And that says the pathway, if you want to have a low carbon future, you're going to need 61,000 electric vehicles in Wakefield. And you could then drill down and look at the different substations, electricity substations that supply electricity across Wakefield and see how many electric vehicles were associated with each of them. And it wasn't just electric vehicles you could do it for, it was heat pumps, it was solar generation, it was wind generation, it was our peak demand, it was all sorts of electrical parameters. And the whole point of this tour was to start a conversation, and that's what we did. We had a whole series of events and workshops. We showed this tour to people and we asked people to provide us feedback. We published it as open data and we published some feedback forms, and we asked people if they could come back to us and tell us what they thought are of the pathways and what their own plans were for maybe electric bus schemes and hydrogen hubs and any other kinds of developments that were going to affect the energy of the future. So we started this conversation this time a year ago with DFES 2019. So I'll stop sharing my screen there and let you carry on with your next question.
So I'm interested in what feedback you had when you showed this to people.
Okay, well, I'll take the lead on that to start with, and to say, yeah, you'll see from the map that Mary shared, there's a wide range of local authorities across the whole of the Northern Powergrid patch, from very industrial cities right the way to very rural communities. And we wanted to get the information out there, that this is information to share for people to engage with and to look to see what low carbon futures might look like. And I think it's fair to say we had a good level of interest on this, and actually there's quite a few local authorities recognise that there's the net zero targets for 2050, but they themselves are wanting to engage with this to look at what it means by going for net zero even earlier than that to 2035 and perhaps even sooner as well. So it's fair to say we've had a good level of engagement on that. I think Mary's also got some interesting industry feedback that she'd like to share with us as well.
Yes, we kind of expected mainly local authorities to get back to us, and we had some very interesting feedback from the glass industry saying, well, hang on, what about industry? The forecast seems to be for declining electricity consumption, but how do you think we're going to meet low carbon targets if we don't turn our glass furnaces into from gas furnaces into electric furnaces? And that set us on a whole pathway where we started exploring industry because it's so important to our region, where you've got big amounts of space heating, which is needs to be fuel switched, is the term that they use. We have the steel industry, we have a whole number of industries that are quite carbon intensive in our region, and they want to be part of this journey as well. So that was a bit of feedback we passed on to National Grid, and that's actually made its way into the national scenarios this year.
That's great. So what else have you done? What other things have you done with that feed within Northern Powergrid, perhaps?
Okay, well, picking up from what Simon said about people's ambitions to reach net zero, the National Grid scenarios last year didn't reach net zero. They only reached an 80% target reduction in the target. So I'm going to share my screen again and show you some emerging thinking scenarios that we developed that began to look at what net zero might look like. So if I go into our emerging thinking scenarios, you can see that we looked at the pathways and we thought, well, the hydrogen pathway is definitely one. And because we're going to be using National Grid scenarios in the future, we wanted to make sure we could be compatible with that as well. So we've got a high hydrogen scenario. We've got a deep electrification scenario, which again is the electric heat route. Both of these scenarios have electric transport. The high hydrogen probably has more hydrogen in the heavy goods vehicles, the big lorries and so on. And then we also developed an early net zero scenario, which reached net zero in 2045. And the point of this was because people have got an ambition to get to net zero earlier, it was to show them what the pathway looked like. These scenarios, the parameters and so on were exactly the same, so you could compare them to DFES 2019. You could zoom in again, it's exactly the same tool. We've got lots more information. If you scroll right down to the bottom, we've got lots of interesting information about what's gone into these scenarios and how we've developed them. And so the whole point of that was to use the feedback we've been given, look at how the pathways might be a bit more ambitious, feed that information back to National Grid. And because we developed this in a bottom-up tool, we're now going to be able, when we move on to DFES 2020, to take local feedback about industry or particular, there might be some hydrogen hubs over here on the East Coast. We'll be able to layer that information into our bottom-up tool as well. So that's what we did with the feedback we were given this time. I think it was right up to the first lockdown. We were getting feedback, and obviously COVID did get in the way a little bit and slow down what feedback we had. But we managed to do what we could with what people had told us at all the events we were running.
Yeah, and I'll pick up from that, that what this is doing, all this data is great data, and it's helping us to look at what does our network need to do to match these aspirations. So at the moment, we're going through what's called our business planning for the next regulatory review period, where we're looking at, with the projected load growth, what does that mean? Have we got sufficient capacity in our network? Do we need to reinforce anywhere? Can we think of better ways of getting more out of our network? So all that information that we're getting there, it's actually informing our business plan at the moment. Clearly, when we get the next DFES done and more information coming from there, that's going to help us fine tune that information. And as we get more engagement with local authorities, with stakeholder groups, as that information comes in, that's also going to help play into how we look to future plan our network.
Great stuff. So you both mentioned the next DFES 2020. Can you tell me a bit about the plans around that?
Yes, I'll come in on that. And I'll also talk about some of our other next steps at MPG. So DFES 2020 will be launched in December, and that's going to take National Grid's scenarios which were published in July and which do now meet net zero. We're in the middle of modelling that with the help of Element Energy across our region. As I speak, that modelling work's being done. And then we're also putting a scenario that brings in some of the best experience that we've had from local feedback, so that we're bringing that feedback right onto the page for people to look at. So that's one of the things we're doing. But I think along with that, Simon mentioned better ways compared to reinforcement of managing our network. One of the big buzzwords is flexibility. And we think open data has got a big role to play in us understanding if we want flexibility is where customers start smart charging their vehicles. So rather than charging it when they get home at night at the peak hour, they're prepared to charge at a different time so that we can help spread the load and reduce the peaks in the network. But in order to be able to manage lots and lots of electric vehicles, we need lots and lots of data, and we need it in a way that's distributed and it's decentralized. It's a new way of looking at data compared to the old sort of central databases and optimization routines of the past. And this is where open data can play such a role. So we've been part of developing a common language with other distribution network operators and National Grid, where we can look at what we call the building blocks that go into the future energy pathways, which are things like the number of electric vehicles, the number of heat pumps. And we're beginning to try and share these building blocks with other stakeholders in the region, with local authorities, with industry, so we can all start beginning to speak a common language, which is going to make it much easier to share our data and interface our data together.
Great. So what are the next steps in terms of stakeholder engagement?
Okay, I'll pick up on that one. And yeah, so the DFES 2020, when we publish that, it's going to be going out in December time, and we're going to be launching an engagement event in January of 2021, doing this as a group event where we want people to come along to that, all interested parties, local authorities, industry groups, etc. And we're very keen to get as much engagement as possible on that. And we really want to then have a follow on from that with lots of engagements face to face with a lot of the interested parties. So it's watch this space for that, but I'm very keen for people to contact me to then be able to get put in touch for this.
Well, that's brilliant. Thanks very much for that. Really good and informative stuff. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.